Sacramento, California, I'm Karen Sloan.
And I'm Zach Needles in Richboro, Pennsylvania. This is Legal Speak, where we break down what's happening in the legal industry. In this week's episode, I talked to Karen Ulrich Stacy, founder and CEO of Diversity Lab, about the associate salary war's impact on law firm diversity and retention. Stacy explains why firms that don't strain themselves to keep up with the competition on associate comp may actually have a leg up in attracting and retaining diverse lawyers.
Many firms are going to look to cover the cost of pay raises with rate hikes and increased billable hour requirements, both of which can disproportionately impact diverse lawyers. But as Stacy notes, firms that choose not to go all in on associate salaries could instead put their resources toward creating a more equitable and inclusive work environment.
Stay tuned for my conversation with Karen Ulrich Stacy. Hi, Karen. Thanks so much for taking the time to chat today.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks, Zach.
So I want to jump right into this conversation because it's a really important one. And obviously, the associate pay wars are happening right now throughout a big law and beyond. And they seem to happen. I feel like they're kind of ongoing all year long at this point. And I wanted to talk specifically about those firms that actually choose not to fully participate in the associate salary awards, and they choose not to match salaries on the highest end of the scale. What can those firms do to seek and attract and retain specifically diverse lawyers?
So those firms are going to be partially happy with the answer I'm about to give you. So money matters, but it only matters to a degree. And, when we look to science and to research to answer this question, there's research that we have in law, but there's also research outside of law that says, you have to pay people enough so that they feel like they're valued. And you have to pay people enough so that money is off the table as they're thinking about these other things that do matter. And so let me talk to you a little bit about some of the research that we've seen outside of law. If you've read or seen anything about Drive, Daniel Pink's book, Drive, he talks a lot about research studies that have been done on this exact idea, right? That not everybody is going to be in a position to pay the highest salaries when compared to their competitors. So what happens if you can't? Well, interestingly, what he says is money is not a motivator. And I think in our world, when we're raising salaries to $200,000 and, we see people flocking to work for firms that pay $200,000, you say, well, gosh, that can't be true. But it turns out that when you look at the studies that they've done at MIT and Carnegie Mellon and University of Chicago, that when we're talking about professional services firms like our law firms and legal departments, and when you're talking about the type of skills and the type of work that you do in those environments, right? High cognitive, really intelligent people doing things that are incredibly complex all day, every day. It turns out that the more money you throw at people, the lower the performance. And that seems absolutely positively not intuitive, right? Because you would think money is a motivator. But it turns out it's not. But there are three things that are. And for firms that are not going to match salaries, my strong suggestion is get close enough to take money off the table. In other words, if you can't get to the 2 or you can't get to the 210 or wherever we are at this point, get close enough and then match it with the other three things that matter. And what Daniel Pink talks about in his Drive are three things. He says autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And in our world, right, in the law firm world, autonomy is giving somebody enough leeway to let them control their own lives. And that's tied up in the hybrid remote work policy conversations we're having right now. But it's also tied in some of the stuff that ALM has been reporting on recently around innovation, right? I think you talked about 3 firms who give their folks time to think about innovations and how to better service clients. And they give them billable credit for it, right? So that it doesn't become something they do in their vacation time or at their home time, but it's part of what the law firm wants and expects. And so I'll give you an example of that. Daniel Pink in the book talks about Atlassian. And every quarter, Atlassian gives all of their employees 1 day, 24 hours to just spend innovating. They can do it anywhere, any place, anytime, that 24 hours. But they have to have something at the end of 24 hours to say, this is what I would love to see happen. And it doesn't have to be big, right? It could be small. But every quarter, they give their folks the autonomy to think about and make what they do and those organizations that they work with better. And I think that's what we were seeing in some of the articles that you and others wrote about innovation. The second thing he talks about is mastery. The idea that if you're growing and learning and your brain is being stimulated on a pretty regular basis and you feel like you're getting better every day, that in some instances matters as much as money or more than money if, again, you've taken enough steps to take money out of the equation. And then the third and final is purpose. And I think this is the hardest for law firms, right? Because sometimes law firms tie purpose to profits, and those are not the right ties, right? The idea is, what type of work are your associates doing? Let's say 70-30. Is 70% of their work making them feel like they're doing something that's going to make the client better, the world better, the firm better, whomever they can attribute it purpose to, not just profits based on the billable hour. And what's really interesting to me, Zach, is that when you think about the three things that all of these studies have said motivates humans, the autonomy, the mastery, and the purpose, we can actually directly corroborate that in law. Several years ago, before I started Diversity Lab, I started a company along with a couple of other people called Lawyer Metrics. And American Lawyer was thoughtful enough to give us 48,000 pieces of data from your American Lawyer mid-level satisfaction survey. And so we analyzed the 120 some odd questions that are asked of mid-levels. What satisfies you? What makes you want to stay at your firm? We looked at those 120 questions and we correlated them to the last question, which is, are you likely to stay at your firm 5 years? And it turns out that in all of those questions, there's about a dozen that correlate to you wanting to stay at your firm and being satisfied and engaged. But there's 3 that matter most. And they bear a striking resemblance to the drive ones that we just talked about. So the 3 things are satisfaction with work. And that's self-explanatory, right? Because it goes to both purpose and it goes to mastery. And it actually matters 2.5 times more than anything else I'm going to mention. So it's the most important. So if your associates and your income partners and your equity partners are getting interesting quality work from their perspective, they are more likely to join your firm and stay at your firm, even if the money is not exactly at the levels that maybe one of those other firms that went, above scale. The second thing that matters is associate partner relations. And that's a bit tied in autonomy, right? Because if you work with and for people who trust you, and if there's a remote work policy and you're at home 3 days a week and you're getting your work done and you're doing it well and you're doing it right, no one's hovering, right? No one's telling you need to be in the office. But that also goes a little bit to what we talked about with mastery, right? Because when we talk about associate partner relations, we want to know that you're learning something from the other person and that they have taken you under their wing and they've, quote unquote, championed you or sponsored you for advancement so that you are getting quality work, you are getting interactions with clients. And if you're moving towards the top, you're getting credit for business development and getting a chance to not only bring in clients, but expand it and then get the credit if that goes to compensation or advancement. And then the last one is family friendliness. And that's broader than it sounds. It doesn't just mean those with kids, right? It's actually talking about family friendliness in that we all have things going on in our lives, whether we're single, whether we're married, whether we have elderly parents, whether we have a sick aunt, right? Whether we have friends that we'd actually like to go do a pickup basketball game with. Does your work and your home life intersect in a way that works well for you? And again, right, that's intertwined with the remote work policies that we've been talking about. It's intertwined with, is your life completely centered around billable hours, or is there something else that you have that allows you to find autonomy, mastery, and purpose both at work and at home? And so there's a lot of avenues for these firms that are not matching. But I will tell you the biggest difficulty in this is that autonomy, mastery, and purpose is likely not coming from management, right? Management can't on high say, please give our talent purpose. I mean, certainly they can set the tone, but it's really those middle tier partners, right? Quote unquote, the other owners of the firm who are going to set the stage for your quality work, your associate partner relations and whether or not your home and your work life integrate in a way that makes sense for you.
That's so interesting. And it makes me think about this issue that's been coming up recently. It's something I wrote about, is this idea that, especially in big law, there's kind of a credibility problem, right? When it comes to this messaging around remote work flexibility and that family friendliness that you're talking about, right? Because it's like, you should take some time off. You should take some time for yourself, for your mental health. But also, you have these crazy billable hour requirements. And, the people who aren't taking time for themselves are the ones who are going to be maybe seen in the office more and that kind of thing. And there's always like this thought that, do they really want me to take time for myself, or is this a test to see how dedicated and loyal I am to my work? And I've just wondered, like, do you have any other ideas or thoughts on how firms that truly do want to show their people that they care about wellness and they care about giving them some of that family friendliness, that they can actually make lawyers believe that, if that makes sense, and sort of gain that trust that, hey, if we're telling you like you have a work-life balance and you're allowed to have a little bit of a life and a little bit of flexibility, you don't have to view that as some like trap that we're setting. We actually mean it, and we actually really do care that you're happy here and you're not just here to make billable hour targets.
Yeah, so the credibility issue you mentioned is a really important one, because this is my 30th year in law. I've been the head of, talent for several of the largest law firms in the world. So I've been through several of these salary wars, right? Like you said, I feel like they're happening once a year, but there's been really gargantuan jumps over a couple of years, right? I remember when we went from 93,000 in big law to 125, and then 125 to 160, and now 160 to 2 or 210. And here's the thing, the firms that couldn't match or wouldn't match tried to position themselves as quality of life or lifestyle firms, but then they didn't live up to the promise, right? So you can't say we're a quality of life firm and then say, yes, but we're not paying you the same as these other firms, but we expect you to bill the same number of hours, and we expect you to put the same type of firm citizenship and other things into the mix. That's not going to fly. And because firms have done that so often, people don't believe them any longer. And I actually think it goes back to what we were talking about. Management has to set the tone, and management has to put the policies and procedures in place that set whatever you want the firm to be and to look like. And let me give you an example. There's an awful lot of firms who have done a great job of aligning their values with their reward system. So if you value pro bono, you likely give 50 hours billable credit. If you value diversity and inclusion, you likely do something like that, right? But you don't typically value it if you're not willing to reward it in some way, shape, or form. And I'm not just talking monetary, right? But we've all seen that in most firms, business development and the rainmakers are rewarded the most. And if we're talking about comp, that's true. But those in management, or those doing pro bono, or those really contributing to the firm in other ways might not see those same benefits. And so we definitely need management making sure they've aligned rewards with values. And if the firm values wellness, and if the firm values diversity, equity, and inclusion, they have to think about how their rewards either speak to or don't speak to that. I'll give you an example. So we were running data for a firm, and we were looking at how collaborative they are. And when we ran the data, and we noticed that only 3% of the partners engaged in any type of business development credit sharing, the firm was so surprised that they weren't more collaborative. But the reward system rewarded humans that brought in business, but they didn't reward in humans when they worked together or shared credit. And so management sets the tone from an alignment with rewards and values. But the other piece, and I go back to that individual partner who's in a particular practice group or in a particular office, and he or she is the one dealing with their associate or their income partners or their counsel every day, all day. And he or she has to believe in the policies and in the tone that management has set, or they can make or break that associate's experience, right? So the firm can say, we're going to work in this hybrid and you can come to the office 3 days a week and work from home 2 days a week. But if you get the raised eyebrow from the partner with whom you work, that he or she may not be so bought into that arrangement, you're going to take a cue, potentially an unwritten cue, that you need to be in the office. And so then we've broken the promise, right? Because that partner made a choice that you either interpreted or you said out loud. But again, it goes back to every single solitary partner in the firm can make or break that associate or that counsel or that income partner's experience, no matter what management has done at the top, unless the rewards are aligned with the values. And the partners have bought into that as well.
In a busy and distracting world, we've become mindful of what we focus our time and attention to. As an attorney, CLE Center allows you to apply your time to enhancing your legal knowledge while earning mandatory CLE credits.
CLE Center, a division of ALM Media, offers online, on-demand, accredited CLE courses across the U.S. Our content is curated from some of ALM's signature events, such as Legal Week and Women Influence Power and Law, in addition to skillful thought leaders from our content partnerships.
Our CLE accredited content ranges from legal technology, cyber breaches, corporate law for small to large legal teams, as well as CLE specialty credits in ethics, diversity, mental health, and more.
So whether you're a talented law firm associate, a driven solo practitioner, or a resourceful in-house counsel multitasking in different parts of your organization, you'll need CLE credits, and the CLE Center can fulfill your requirements with practical knowledge you can use.
Please visit our website at www.clecenter.com or give us a call at 1-800-348-0466.
Use code CLE20 to receive a 20% discount off your purchase at checkout. That's clecenter.com, code CLE20.
Hi there. Since you're listening to Legal Speak, a podcast that's all about trends in the legal industry, it's likely that you're a lawyer or legal professional and that you take your job and career success seriously.
You know that information gives you an edge, whether you're a partner talking to clients, an in-house lawyer advising your company's CEO, or an associate who's just starting to make a name for yourself at your organization. The most successful lawyers make it a point to stay on the forefront of what's driving litigation and deals in the sectors where their clients operate.
At Law.com, we're here to help, and you're going to want to check out our newest offering, Law.com Radar. It's a high-speed news feed that delivers updates on the latest deals, litigation, and industry headlines that are relevant to your practice. You select the companies, industries, and practice areas that matter to you, and Radar brings you the information and competitive intelligence you need.
Law.com Radar isn't a traditional news site. It's backed up by some pretty amazing technology that analyzes and refines data in seconds in order to deliver the information you need hours ahead of other sources, all in a sleek, easy-to-use website and mobile experience.
It's easy to get started, so check out the new Law.com Radar at www.law.com/radar.
That's law.com/radar for instant updates on high-stakes legal matters personalized to your practice.
Before we wrap up, I wanted to just ask you to expand a little bit on something that you spoke with my colleague Dylan Jackson about recently. And we just talked earlier in this conversation about how money is not the sole motivator for most people. And obviously these firms that go all in competing in the associate salary wars, a lot of them are going to have to make that up on the back end, either through increased billable hour requirements or increased rates. Can you talk a little bit about how that can potentially undermine those law firms' diversity efforts when they have to kind of do that to make up for all the money that they're throwing at their associates? How does that specifically impact the diverse attorneys at those firms?
Yeah. So, I think about simple economics, right? If you're paying your associates a lot more, then obviously your expenses have gone up a lot more. And there's only two ways to manage that. You can either bill more to your clients, and the brunt of that is going to fall on your associates. So their billable hours are going to have to rise to make up for the increased expenses. The only other way to do that is raise your rates. And then you'll have a bunch of unhappy clients who are less likely to give you high quality work, right? And they may shift to other law firms, or quite frankly, they may do what we see them doing more and more, shifting to build their own internal in-house capability to handle a good amount of that work. And here's how it affects from a diversity, equity, and inclusion standpoint. So, as these salary wars have started to take place, we're seeing law firms pull back on money they were spending as it relates to a lot of different things in their firms, right? So, there's some talk about pulling back on even retreats when we can come back together in a relatively short time, let's hope. They're pulling back on things like retreats. And we're also seeing them pull back on things like money they might have spent to increase inclusion and equity in their environments. Because if there's no way to stretch the pie and they just have to reallocate dollars to compensation, it might mean that less dollars are spent on things that they're not prioritizing. And sometimes that, diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, unfortunately, fall into that category. There's one other downside. I think that the increased money also combined with the fact that we're now much more mobile, right? There are some firms allowing folks to work in offices or in locations where they don't have offices. So those firms may be an initial lure to some of our great talent, including some of our diverse talent. But those firms that have gone high on salaries and offered all of these other things, they still are going to be beholden to the same thing that drives and keeps individuals at their organizations. So if you've raised salary, but you're not thinking about autonomy, mastery, purpose, if you're not thinking about the quality of work that your associates are getting or your partner-associate relations, you're going to lose them in a couple of years. So you will have patted yourself on the back for having recruited a great, amazing, diverse workforce, but you'll lose them. And so it really is a short-term fix to a long-term problem that it's not going to solve it with just money.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've definitely seen that already playing out. That money can't buy loyalty. And even these firms that are doing these retention bonuses to try to keep associates from leaving, we hear, another firm will just come in and pay off that retention bonus and the person will leave anyway. So your point is really well taken that it's going to take more than just a hefty salary to keep somebody around, especially if they're even more sort of miserable in the work that they're doing because of all the money that you're throwing at them. So I think it's really interesting. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk about this topic because I think, I certainly understand the impulse of firms to want to be competitive. And when these salary wars crank up, you don't have a whole lot of time to think about it. You kind of just, if you want to compete, sometimes you just dive in. I think it's really important to have these conversations, though, to kind of keep firms in check and to just remind them that there are consequences to all of these actions. And there are other people who are affected when you kind of go all in trying to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak. So I really appreciate you taking the time to chat about this really important topic.
Absolutely. And I'll offer a really controversial idea as we close, Zach. So if you want to make up for the pull on the economics, right, you've paid your associates and hopefully your counsel and income partners more or relative to each other, what you should do is think about maybe pulling some of that comp from the partners who don't do a very good job of retaining and advancing their great talent, right? So for years, we look at our regretted losses and we look at them firm-wide or we look at them by practice group. But why isn't a regretted loss of great talent attached to that partner or those two partners that work closely with that person? And why aren't partners rewarded, or why aren't there consequences for accountability to retaining great talent? And why isn't that done at the partner level? So if you want to right size the economics, pull money from the partners who aren't ensuring that their associates have what they need to grow and develop, and then pay more to the partners who are, in addition to those rainmakers that you're already paying a lot of money to.
That's really interesting. That concept is so fascinating to me because, partners are in charge of the young lawyers that they work with, but I feel like there isn't a whole lot of attention paid at a lot of firms about their management skills and how they deal with people. We've heard plenty of horror stories about how partners deal with the people who work for them. So I think that idea of sort of incentivizing them to be good managers and to foster the careers of the younger lawyers that they're working with and reward them for that, or maybe, dock them a little bit, dock their pay a little bit if they don't do a good job of that. I think that's super interesting. I'm sure there are folks out there who would not like that idea, but I like it. I think it's interesting.
Well, how about this, Zach? The people who like it are those great partner managers, and the people who hate it are those partner managers who might need some training.
Exactly. I think that's really interesting. I think that's exactly right. Excellent. Well, thanks so much, Karen. Again, I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Zach.
And one final note, this is unfortunately Karen's last day as Legal Speak co-host. So I just wanted to say, Karen, you'll be missed, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity one day to have you on here.
I would love that. It's been such a pleasure to be co-hosting with you these past few months. And before I sign off, I would like to share just a couple of my favorite editions of Legal Speak during my tenure. The first is one that we put out in April on 4/20, I will note, with Florida attorney Dustin Robinson, who is known as Mr. Cannabis Law. And he talked about his practice in the marijuana space and all the interesting aspects that come with that sort of new area. And the second one that I want to point to is an interview with Sidley Austin partner Corinne Swift, who has 2 kids and a very busy practice. And her interview really talked about a reality for a lot of us, which is parenting during the pandemic and juggling that with your job. And my favorite moment from that interview was when one of her 2 children actually came into the room and interrupted, and she had to stop and say, okay, hey, I have to deal with my child, because I think, for so many of us, that's kind of been the reality of working during the pandemic.
Right.
So, for anybody interested, go check those out.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Karen, and good luck with everything going forward. And like I said, maybe we'll have you on as a guest one day.
I love that. Thanks, Zach. That's our program for today. Thanks for listening. Please send your comments, questions, and ideas for future episodes to legalspeak@alm.com.
Legal Speak is produced by Charles Garner. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, you can keep up with the latest legal news online at law.com.